Hey, boys and girls, I am going to read you part 3 of January Sparrow. And we have found out so far that January was a runaway and they caught him and he was beaten. The next day, the family, the Crosswhite family, they left in a hurry to get away from their master because the master was going to sell the brothers, the younger brothers in the Crosswhite family. We know that one of the main characters in the story is Sadie, and we found out that Sadie made a friend. She made a friend named Polly, and she's a white girl. And they moved up to Michigan, Marshall, Michigan, because they were at that point they were safe, but they knew that they were not going to be completely safe until they moved to Canada. So the other day when I read to you on Thursday, I'll just read this last paragraph, and we have looks like we have this is Sadie, and this is Sadie's daddy, and then I think this is Moses. He was the guy with the tall hat, and then some other. They just made a lot of friends there. So I'll read this very last paragraph here, and then we'll move on. Adam and Sarah, who are mom and dad, along with the Ingersolls and the Gorhams, were part of the underground, helping other folks coming through Marshall on their way to Canada. But not a day went by that any of them let their guard down. All right, now you notice what I'm speaking. I'm speaking in a little bit of an accent, and that is because I'm speaking in the voice of the narrator. And I'm not sure if any of you have figured it out yet, but hopefully you have. We'll figure out by the end of the story who the narrator of the story is. We know that the narrator of the story is not the author, because Patricia Polacco didn't talk like that. So someone is telling this story. All right, so I left you Thursday with a picture, and we're going to find out what happens today in the story. All right, then came their 4th spring in Marshall. Adam had moved his family into their very own house 2 summers before. One evening, Auction Bell came to tell Sadie's daddy that they was a stranger in town and that everybody was watching him. That night, Sadie had a nightmare that was worse than any of the others. She dreamt that Lee, Ford, and Troutman broke down their door and tried to drag them out of their home. She woke up in a cold sweat, then eased herself when she remembered she was safe, and it was spring, and they was in Marshall. In the spring, a very special blessing came upon the Crosswhite house. Sarah birthed a sweet baby girl. Sadie had a new sister. I'm going to name her Frances, Sarah whispered as they all gathered around her. Sadie and her brothers looked at each other in shock. But, Mama, that's Master Giltner's name, and Mr. Troutman's too. How can you do that? Ben asked. So's none of you will ever fear that name again. From now on, you'll think of this here baby girl and know that she was born a free person in a free state. I want her name to stand for freedom from those 2 men. Remember, those were her masters. Those were the masters that they were trying to avoid. Then, one night, there was a knocking at the door. Mr. Gorham and Mr. Ingersoll came by often, but this night they hurried in. They looked bothered. Adam poured them cups of coffee and chicory. They leaned in to Adam. There's talk that slave trackers have been seen as close as Coldwater, Gorham said between sips of coffee. They was asking about Negroes traveling through, Ingersoll added. Well, Coldwater's only 12 miles away from here, Adam whispered. He could see Sadie peeking around the edge of the doorway. I heard they captured some runaways in Indiana near Goshen, Sarah whispered as she sat down near them. Well, as long as there's breath in my body, no one's going to take any runaways from Marshall, Gorm said, and he stood up and he pounded his fist on the table. Never, Ingersoll agreed. The Crosswhites whispered more with the two men, and after a time Ingersoll and Gorm left. Sadie and her brother snuck on up to bed. When Sadie fell into sleep, she had one of her feverish nightmares. The Patty Rollers came and got her family and took to beating all of them. This time Mr. Troutman and Master Giltner was standing over 'em. She woke bolt upright in her bed. Sweat was running down her forehead, and her heart was beating so hard she could hear it. She sat up for the rest of the night and watched for the sun to rise. So they were definitely having some bad dreams, weren't they? That next morning at breakfast, Adam gathered his family around for a meeting. You probably heard about them patty rollers. They've been south of here. I want you children to know that I have a plan. Anyone ever comes to this here door and tries to take any of us, ever, I've made a signal with Auction Bell. You know, he's not more than 3 doors away. So when I fire a single shot in the air, that's his signal to tell the people. People will come to help us. Negroes and white folks will come running, I promise you. I don't want any of you to fret, but he looked at each of his children. More than ever, you can't tell nobody that we is runaways. You can't never tell that to no one. Soon it was summer in Marshall. There'd been no reports of strangers from the South for some time. The country fair was set up near the stockyards south of town. Sadie put on her best shift to go to the fair with Polly. Aunt Della and Miss Nancy made him a picnic basket so they could set up under the shade of the oaks and eat whenever they felt like. Sadie and Polly loved the excitement of the fair. Both girls ran from exhibit to exhibit, but Sadie suddenly stopped when she saw they was in front of the hog auction. Auction Bell waved and smiled, but Sadie seemed startled and strangely sad. When the girls was setting in the shade of the oak trees, Polly finally spoke. Sadie, something's wrong. You seem so happy. Now you're not. What's wrong? Polly, what would you say if I told you that there is such a place here on earth where they auction off people, just like them hogs? Sadie whispered, watching a man with a stick poke the pigs into a pen. What do you mean, Sadie? Polly asked. There's a place where people stand on auction blocks, chained together. White folks bid on them to... Sadie's voice trailed off. Polly just listened. White folks come up and they open their mouths and they check their hair. They pull babies out of their mama's arms. I seen it. It don't matter that them mamas fussed and carried on. They babies is taken and sold off. Sold off? Polly asked. There's a place where Negroes is owned by other people. Sadie said as tears rolled down her cheeks. I come from such a place, Polly. I'm not from Illinois. I come from Kentucky. My mama and my brothers did too. We is owned by Master Giltner. We is slaves. We is runaways. Sadie sputtered as she covered her face and sobbed. Well, that ain't no bother to me, Sadie. You'll always be my best friend in the whole world, Polly whispered. Then the girls hugged. Polly, you can't never tell what I just told you. Or the patty rollers, the slave catchers, they'll find us. Polly rested her fingers over Sadie's lips. I promise I'll never tell our secret, Sadie. Then the girls ate their picnic together, and they spoke no more of it. Sadie just told Polly that they were slaves. All right, check this out. As the fall came and went, there were still no more reports of the slave catchers. Soon, the fourth winter that the Crosswhites spent in Marshall was upon them. Christmas was celebrated with great joy. Then it was early January. Baby Francis was 10 months old and getting into everything. One day, Ben came running in the front door, stomping the snow off his feet. Sadie, look! Someone left you a package on the porch. It has your name on it. What she's holding in her hand. He handed Sadie a small calico bundle tied with twine. There was a note. Sadie untied the package. Everyone gasped. It was January Sparrow. The note had just 3 words. I found you. Sadie's mama dropped to her knees on the kitchen floor. The patty rollers and Mr. Troutman has found us. They know where we are, she cried. No, Mama, January left it. I just know it. I can feel it in my heart. Sadie gasped as she held the sparrow close to her cheek. Oh, baby, Sarah whispered as she knelt in front of Sadie. Your daddy put January in his grave himself. You know that. You have to know that, she said as she hugged Sadie. Then she turned to Ben and Cyrus. Go fetch your father, she hissed. So, was it January? Or was it the patty rollers? Sadie froze inside. Maybe her mama was right. Her father had warned her not to tell anyone where they'd come from, and she told Polly. Well, maybe Polly told someone without meaning any harm. Or maybe this was all Sadie's fault. When Cyrus and Ben came back with John and their father, Mr. Gorham and Mr. Ingersoll was with them. Sarah told them what happened, and she showed them January's sparrow. Gorham spoke first. Well, the only stranger here in town lately was a lawyer looking to open his practice here. He told me he was an abolitionist, and an abolitionist is a person who is against slavery. Of course, I told him nothing about anyone. Mr. Ingersoll sat in a heap at the kitchen table, rubbing his chin. Do you remember what his name was? Adam asked Gorham, fearing what he might hear. Well, yes. His name was Francis Troutman, Gorham answered. Francis Troutman. That was their master. Troutman, oh my Lord, I should have told you the names of the people that was looking for us. I guess I never did. Adam's voice trailed off. Sadie and her brothers grabbed onto each other and rocked with fear. Adam paced back and forth. What are we going to do? Sarah wailed. There's not a Negro or white man, for that matter, in this here town that's going to give you up to them, Ingersoll said sternly. Wait a minute. Gorham broke in. He left town this afternoon. He wouldn't have left it. He thought he'd found you. Sarah reared up and snatched the sparrow out of Sadie's hands. But Sadie's sparrow, she wailed as she shook it in each of their faces. Someone knows exactly who we are and where we are. Ooh, I'm not going to show you the picture yet. For the next 2 weeks, folks in Marshall was watchful, but no one came into town that wasn't known to them. Folks started feeling easier. There we go. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, January 27th, 1847. When Adam Crosswhite was jarred awake by a fierce pounding at his door. Thinking it might be Mr. Gorham, he opened the door. 3 men pushed past the door so hard that it almost wrenched clean off and its hinges. It was Francis Troutman, Willie Ford, and Jimmy Lee. Lee seized Adam and he tried to force him out the front door into a waiting wagon. David Giltner, the master's son, was driving. But Adam broke free and raced upstairs, shouting for his family to hide. The three was right behind him, but he barricaded his bedroom door. He threw open the window and he fired a single shot into the air. "They're here!" Adam yelled. "They're here to take us away!" He hoped Auction Bell heard. Adam could see lights in the windows up his street just as the three men broke down his door and seized him. As they dragged him down the stairs, Adam could hear Auction Bell ring down the streets, already hollering for help. Sadie and her brothers had hidden in the attic eaves, but one by one, Lee and Ford reached in, grabbed him out. Sadie started praying. "Dear God, turn me into a sparrow. Let me fly far away from here. Dear God, turn me into a sparrow. Let me fly far, far away from here," she chanted. Then she felt a hand grab her by the hair and drag her down the stairs, her back bumping each step and bruising all the way down. Lee and Ford flung all the crosswhites in a heap on the kitchen floor, then tried to force them all to their feet and out the door into the waiting wagon. "It's freezing out there. My children and they need their coats and their boots," Sarah pleaded. She pulled her children around her. Then her eyes fell on David. You can see his picture here. Her eyes fell on David. If you remember, that was the master's son, and that was who Sarah had raised as a little boy, as a baby. And then he grew up. Her eyes fell on David Giltner. He was just standing there in the kitchen. "David, you," she whispered. He hardened his gaze. He didn't look away. "I'm here representing the interest of my father, and we're within our rights to take you all back to Kentucky," he barked. Sarah came close to his face. "My milk made your bones, boy," she whispered through clenched teeth. "I held you at my breast and raised you up as my very own, and now you can do me like this?" Tears filled her eyes. "You think your daddy finally gonna love you for doing this?" she hissed. David Giltner looked away, and went out to the wagon. Auction bell kept ringing. A crowd started gathering around outside of the Crosswhite house. People, both white and colored folks, started screaming down the streets with sticks, hammers, torches, and clubs. They was riled up and shouting and shaking their fists. Some of the men even dropped their coats in that bitter cold and were fixing to fight. "You ain't taking these Crosswhites anywhere," they yelled. They surged forward, shook their fists, and pounded on the outside of the Crosswhite house. They was coming from every direction. Even Lee and Ford looked scared. That's when Francis Troutman went outside, drew his revolver, and he pointed it at the crowd. Stand back, I say," he ordered as he spun around, pointing the gun at him. The crowd pulled back. The deputy sheriff pushed his way from the back of the crowd and stood with Troutman, glowering at the crowd. "These here men," he announced over the din of the mob, "have the right, under the law, to reclaim their property." The crowd roared. "Property? People ain't nobody's property," a voice called out. The deputy tried to shout over the protests. "These here Negroes are the Giltner's property. It's the law. Now all of you, stand down," he barked. Troutman holstered his pistol and crossed his arms defiantly outside the front door. In the house, Jimmy Lee lurched at Sarah Crosswhite and latched baby Francis by her ankles. "We're taking him, and none of you can stop us. That's the law." Sarah screamed and fell back, still holding her baby. Lee pulled at both of them as Sarah skidded on the floorboards with her heels. Suddenly the crowd parted and Gorham and Ingersoll came bursting into the house. They wrestled the baby free from Lee. "This child was born in a free state. She's a free-born citizen of Marshall, and you can't take her," Gorham shouted. He and Ingersoll forced the Kentucky Four out of the Crosswhite's kitchen and shoved them out the front door. Then Gorham and Ingersoll stood with their backs to the door, the Crosswhites safe inside. Gorham leaned into Francis Troutman's face. "Like I said, you ain't taking these people anywhere." The crowd surrounded the four and leaned toward them, crowding them in. Francis Troutman straightened his coat and tried to catch his composure. "I want all of your names." He took a pad from his pocket. "And I'm taking these names to your judge, demanding that he order your arrest. You are all breaking the law," he thundered over the grumbling crowd. So we're going to stop there. And tomorrow we will pick up with the last part of the story. Right? So hopefully you've enjoyed this so far. And make sure you're checking out your Google Classroom. This week is Mother's Day on Sunday. So make sure that you check out your writing assignment early, and that will be something that you are able to give to your mom for Mother's Day. So, all right, guys, I look forward to seeing you, some of you tomorrow, and some of you Wednesday, and then all of us together on Friday. All right, love you guys. Bye.